And then he gives a warning. He gives a warning about how division destroys the church. And I really think, man, I should probably just make this next week's sermon, because we have become such an angry, I'm not talking about just this, I'm talking about our whole culture and even our Christian culture. Look what he says in verse 15. We become so angry. If you bite and devour one another, watch out, or you will be consumed, not by the wrath of God, but by one another, he says. And I am convinced that we live in a world of angry people. We live in a world of 400 years of incessant racism and mistreatment of minorities has left a lot of minorities in this country angry. The prevalence of abuse, and people were only just scratching the surface now to find out, because it was swept under the rug, it was kept under the rug, but there has been so much physical, mental, and sexual abuse that was kept secret, and it affects people. It affects mostly women, but not exclusively. And I've come to know some of the abuse survivors in our convention, and the way they get treated, and a lot of times they're just told, well, get over it. And it's just such a burden they have trouble dealing with. A lot of times their anger is not just at the people that hurt them, but the way law enforcement and churches respond to it. But they're angry. And here's one of the biggest things, is that the two institutions that are given to us by God to help us, see, my home wasn't perfect by any stretch, but the home that I grew up in was a refuge. My mom and dad loved me. And if I went out in the world and skinned my knee, I'd come home and Mom would put a Band-Aid on it and, give me a kiss. And if I went out and somebody mistreated me, my dad might come back and say, hey, learn to stand up for yourself or something like that. But they would also care for me. And that's what the home is meant to be, a refuge in a cruel world. You go out in a cruel world and you come home and it's like, hey, we love you anyway. But today, a lot of people, the place where most of their pain and hurt is found is in their home. Years ago, my dad went to Australia. This was in 64, 65. And he came home, and it was the first time he'd ever heard this, but he said, he was preaching, and a man came up and said, I have so much struggle when you talk about the Heavenly Father, because my father was so abusive to me that I can almost not listen to you talk about the Heavenly Father. Can you imagine how many people deal with that today? Father, for me, that's like, yeah. But for a lot of people, it's not. And the church is meant to be a place of love. Think about this verse, folks. Jesus said this. All people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. My dad was in a short period of time preached in something like, was it 100 or 200 churches in the space of like a couple of years. And he said he could count, I don't know whether it was 100 or 200, he said he could count on one hand the number of churches that were not involved in a significant fight. You wonder why people aren't coming to Christ? When they go to a church and the people are throwing mud at one another? When the reputation of the church and the community is sullied by division? If you bite, and by the way, the word bite and devour is very specific. It actually Some scholars think these animals, aren't they cute? These are African wild dogs. When I was in Africa in 1988, I've never seen these, although they have some of the ugliest dogs you'll ever see in Senegal. They told me that of all the animals that you do not want to encounter in the wild in Eastern Africa, where they have lions, you don't want to mess with lions. They're really pretty bad. But one of the main animals that there are certain, like I think it's orangutans, are really, you don't want to mess with them. They're violent and vicious. But a pack of wild dogs is one of the worst things that you can encounter, because they gather as a group and they start to bite and devour. And one commentator said that he believes that Paul probably had in mind a pack of wild dogs like these. And that was his description of what was going on in churches. It's not just 21st century. It was happening in the first century as well. But instead of a place that was known because anyone could walk in the doors and find love. Oh, we might not ignore sin, but it'd be a place of love. It was a place where wild dogs bit and devoured. The church is to be a place of love. Satan's strategy is to sow discord. Satan loves gossip. He loves biting and devouring. That's who he is. And that ought never be who we are.